Hi everyone, my name is Jodi Wassner, and I'm a psychologist from Australia who is a passionate person working with neurodiversity, but I also love acceptance and commitment therapy. I've been practicing as a child psychologist for about 25 years and as an ACT therapist for about 20 years. So today I'm going to be talking about really adapting some of the ACT strategies that we have to be used with neurodivergent populations. I'll speak today in two parts. At the beginning, we're going to talk about the concept of neurodiversity, and we're going to look at the concept of acceptance, which is a really central part of ACT, but we're going to look at it in a slightly different way in terms of its connection with flexibility. We're going to look a little bit of neurobiology, and then in part two, we're going to look at what we do when really difficult situations emerge. And through that, we're going to explore the ACT concept of experiential avoidance, followed by values and committed action and psychological flexibility. Okay, so let's talk about neurodiversity, which really is a concept in which we talk about the idea that we all have different brains and all of our minds notice different things. And society has always sort of said to us that there's only one right way to look at things, and anyone that does it differently, they're seen as being incorrect and need to learn what we call the neurotypical way. So neurotypicals refer to most people, and we assume that the way they view the world is right. But now what we talk about with neurodiversity is a concept which includes autism, ADHD, sensory processing, and learning difficulties. And what we sort of talk about is these brains just view the world differently. They're different, not broken. So, for example, we might find, if you think about the five senses, you and I might be walking down the street and one of us notices the smell of a cafe really, really strongly, whereas another person doesn't notice it at all. We just sort of talk about our sense of smell being different. It doesn't mean that one of us got it right and one of us got it wrong. And so we talk about wanting to really celebrate these differences rather than judging them, and recognize them as being really beneficial to society in terms of having unique ways to solve problems and look at the world. Okay, so Olga, would most people be able to speak a little bit of English, that they would be able to do this exercise?
Yes, I'm going to translate it actually. So
okay, go for it. Right, I'll just give everyone a minute to do that. This is the response of a young neurodivergent person. And of course, what they've done is they've changed it and they've made it in alphabetical order within the individual words. And so to me, I feel like they've got it correct. They haven't done anything wrong. But for a lot of autistic people who perceive things in a very literal way, they might do this in a classroom and find themselves in trouble. And the teacher tells them off for being, trying to be clever and smart. And I'm not sure what the word is for like a smart aleck. And so they find themselves getting in trouble when they're legitimately just trying to get things right. And this is another example, name these shapes. So instead of saying a square or an oval and a rectangle, this young person has given them names, Charlotte, Emily, Maria. So again, the young person could find themselves getting in trouble when that's just the way their brain perceives the activity. Okay, so what we need to talk about is when we work with these young people, we need to let them know that neurodiversity isn't wrong or broken, because a lot of them are getting in trouble a lot at school or they're misinterpreting situations. They often feel like they're broken and there's something wrong with them. So we need to start to change the narrative to being around the fact that you just notice things differently. And so I like to do, one of the metaphors I like to use with young people is the trip to the theatre. So we say, imagine that you and your father decide that you want to go and see a show together. So you go to the theatre and you watch the show and, you have a lovely time. And then afterwards, on the way home from the show, you guys start talking about the show. And Dad is talking about the songs and the characters and the story, whereas you, the young person, might be talking about all the lighting or the stage sets. And so you've both kind of noticed different things in the theatre. Doesn't mean that one of you got the show wrong. It's just that different brains automatically notice different types of things. And so when we sort of unpack that, we need to start helping the young person recognize that because we're speaking different, almost like different languages sometimes, it can be useful to think about how the other person works as well. And this is when we might start to be able to bring in some social skills. And so one of the things we talk about is a lot of autistic people say to you that they don't understand what goes on socially. So they might be in the playground at school and all the kids are excited about football or something, and they don't get it. They don't understand why or how kids behave the way they do. And so they often describe feeling as though they are in a foreign land. And so I developed the Japan metaphor to help kids recognize that you can still have a rich and fulfilling life, even when it feels like you're a foreigner. And so the metaphor goes that imagine that you decide that you'd love to move to Japan. You're really fascinated by the culture and the lifestyle and the cuisine, and you think, I really want to move to Japan. So you spend the next year learning the language, learning the cuisine, learning the culture. And then the time comes and you're ready to move to Japan. And you go, okay, you can find your way around, you learn how to do different things. But you do make some mistakes. So culturally, you might get some things wrong. You might bow the wrong amount, but you might also get the language a bit wrong, answer things incorrectly. And you realize that Japanese will never feel as natural to you as your own first language. So what we then start to talk about is it doesn't mean that living in Japan is a disaster. We find ways to make a meaningful life, even though it feels as though it's not always natural for you. And you do that by meeting other people that speak your language in Japan, or you meet Japanese people who enjoy people that speak your language. And then we can find ways to have a rich and fulfilling life, even though we feel like we're a bit odd in our world. And so what we can do is when we talk about the foreigner experience, we can say that I can learn their ways. I can learn the ways that other people do things, and it makes it easier for me. Sometimes young autistic people will say to me, it's not fair. Why do I have to learn the neurotypical ways when no one bothers to learn my autistic ways? And it's true. And I think it is a little bit sad, but we can recognize that people that are important to us, our family, our friends, our therapists, people who are true friends, they will want to learn about our ways of doing things. And so the point of when we teach social skills to autistic young people, it's really important that we don't frame it as because you're doing it wrong or because you're broken. We need to frame it as it's just that it's going to make life easier for you, right? If you understand why the kids over there behave the way they did, it'll be easier for you. Also help you understand why people might not be connecting with me. Because they make a lot of social mistakes and they often don't understand what they've done wrong. So by learning the neurotypical ways, it can help them make sense of what's done wrong, what's gone wrong, and help them manage situations better. We also talk about being able to honor my true self. So even though we do learn the neurotypical ways, a little bit later, we're going to talk about ways we can really celebrate my own differences, my own ways of doing things. Okay, so when we talk about honoring neurodiversity, can I get you guys to write down in the chat some strengths that you know are associated with autism or other types of neurodiversity? And then perhaps, Olga, if you could share them.
Okay, so we're going to wait for a couple of minutes. Okay. And
and just let me know what people come up with.
Yes, of course. So Farhat is saying that it's the incredible ability to focus, and also they have special talents. I can say that, okay, another one, extraordinary thinking. They're thinking out of the box.
Yeah.
Also, I think that they can take the chances, and their brain works often very, very fast. So they have different ideas. When the neurotypical guy or girl has one idea, but we have different ideas.
Yeah.
Okay, they have creativity, they have attention, several ways, several times saying attention. Also, interesting ways of deciding what to do.
Okay, so these are great. And, you know, one of the things I say is that as a therapist, it's really, really important to just know these really well, have them off the top of your head and have them ready to share. And parents as well, because what can happen is it's all very well for us to talk about loving your difference and don't worry about, about doing things differently to the other kids. But, it can be really hard work feeling different. And, a lot of grief and sadness can come over these young people very easily. So it's really important that we have, already celebrated what some of the strengths are. And so the neuroaffirming model, and I really recommend that you look this up, it's a strengths-based approach to neurodiversity. And it recognizes neurodivergent people as essential and really valuable to our society and deserve respectful and affirming care. And it emphasizes acceptance and inclusion. Okay, so let's have a look at how the neuroaffirming model is compatible with ACT. So for people who've learned a bit of ACT, one of the things people emphasize is that it's around accepting difficult inner experiences. So when I feel anxious or sad, or if I've got a difficult thought, a lot of people think about ACT as being, well, I need to work on accepting that difficult thought or feeling. But there's another part of ACT that's really important, which is about accepting life difficulties as being something that's normal. So suffering, difficulty, hardship, these are normal parts of life. And so one of the parts of ACT that's really important is about being willing to sit with that difficulty and still move towards a meaningful life. And so ACT is not about fixing people or about symptom reduction, which the medical model sometimes does. It's about valued living. And so whilst a CBT approach might be more around reducing symptoms and getting people to behave in a more normative way, ACT is about, well, I'm going to accept my quirkiness. I'm going to accept my difference. And so ACT encompasses a love of diversity and really, really accepting myself for who I am and also accepting others. Yeah. Okay. So we need to talk about ways to teach parents to model that acceptance of young people. And so it's really important that parents get used to talking about acceptance language in their day-to-day life. So parents who model a love of diversity and who admire individuality, they've got more chance of having their child believe them when they say, I love you for your diversity. Otherwise, the child feels like, oh, there's something wrong with me. Mm-hmm. And so an example might be if you're walking down the street with your child and you see a woman with big, bright pink hair, a parent might say, well, how ridiculous versus what an individual. And by using what an individual, you're showing more acceptance language. Because a lot of autistic are very aware of their difference and they don't like their difference. They just want to be able to fit in like everyone else. And so if we want to get them to celebrate their strengths and accept their diversity, they have to believe that the important adults around them also admire difference. So masking is a really important concept that we need to talk about. So masking refers to when autistic people try to look normal. So they try to be look socially normal. And they do this to try and please the neurotypical people. So they feel like they have to hide their true self to try and look more normal. And so examples of masking might be forcing themselves to give eye contact, even though it's really uncomfortable, or pushing through intense sensory discomfort. So putting up with loud noises or touch they don't like. And of course, disguising stimming behavior. So if they're feeling like they need to fidget or flap or pace, that they stop themselves from doing it to appear more normal for their peers. And so this is just an example how when autistic people try to mask, they try to look like their peers, but they don't actually end up looking like them anyway. And so they still end up feeling like outsiders. And so it's really important to recognize that masking is a social survival strategy, but it is extremely uncomfortable and it's very, very exhausting. And often when we see kids that appear like they're well behaved at school, what's very common in autism is that they come home in the afternoon and they have meltdowns and they're really, really they're big outbursts and violent outbursts sometimes. And this is because so much of their energy during the school day has gone into masking. So we have to recognize that when kids mask, there's a huge mental health cost, a huge emotional cost. So dysregulated emotion is a term that we often use that really describes a state in which a young person's responses are really poorly controlled. And sometimes people think that it's being like naughty or misbehaving, but the truth is the young person hates it. They feel like they lack control. And so when they are dysregulated, we get lots of inappropriate responses. And the person usually feels really bad about it and they can't stop themselves. And what we know is that when an autistic person is dysregulated, they're more rigid. So they have less ability to calm down and see other people's points of view. And so they really need to learn flexibility in these moments. And so for a child to be able to regulate themselves and calm down from that, the most important thing we know is for the adult, usually the parent, to help the child feel heard and understood. And sometimes as adults, we try and use logic to say to them, no, but that's wrong. But that's not what you need in that moment. We just need we need adults to say, I can see you're upset. I can see what's happening, and help them to get calm. Once they calm down, then we can get them to see other points of view and be more flexible. And so it's also important to recognize that our ability to regulate fluctuates from day to day. So parents might assume, oh, but he could do that yesterday. He must be faking it today. When the reality is we all have different ability. Okay, so another thing that's really important to think about with autistic young people is the sensory differences. So when we think about the 5 senses, see, hear, taste, smell, we can be over responsive, which means sounds can feel too loud for us, or touch, can be too scratchy for us. Or we can be under responsive, which means we don't feel enough. So we climb and we touch and we need to be with everything. And we know that these are genuine changes in our neurology. There's no way we can change it. So it's not the sort of thing that we should push or force them to get better at doing. It's really about making accommodations and helping them, understanding their needs and helping them in that way. And that sensitivity increases when we're more distressed. So on a more anxious day, we're going to be more sensitive. And so then there's a lot of people autistic people that need sensory experiences to help them calm down, like flapping and chewing and pacing. And we need to give them opportunities to do this. And a lot of teachers are really impatient with this. They just want their kids to have still hands and to sit still and have what they call quiet bodies. But it's really important that these kids have the opportunity to do what they need to do. And if we don't provide them with the opportunity, then we're going to get more dysregulated behavior. And so it's really important that when we're in counselling roles, that we advocate for those kids in school. So we need to teach teachers about what their needs are, look at their sensory profile, look at the classroom to make sure it's set up for success. And also helping parents to know how to go into schools and talk openly about their kids' needs and to fight for the classrooms to be safe for them so they can learn as best as possible. And so one idea is just to give kids breaks, giving them alone time, and really considering, do they need to do everything, like going to an assembly, which is a big sensory overwhelm. So talking to teachers and seeing if it's entirely necessary for the kids to go there. And so we need to give sensory tools opportunities for them to fidget with lots of different things. And that's going to give them the ability to really thrive much more in the classroom. They'll be less disruptive and more opportunity for learning. And also to allow the kids to move around the classroom and to maybe have different seating arrangements just to help them to be regulated so they can learn better. And so when you're in a therapy room as a counsellor, it's really important that you have a setup that allows the kids to feel as though they can move around and be free. And this is something I have on my wall, which really says to the kids, you can sit however you need to do, play with whatever you need to play with. So when they come into the therapy room and they can see that they're allowed to do these things, we're trying to get a sense of relaxation. And only when they're relaxed and they trust you in the therapy room, that's when they learn. So we have to say to them, I'm on your team. Often these kids get in trouble a lot and they're always having adults tell them off. So our job is to help them feel comfortable and to support them so they can start opening up to us. And so for the young person to know your behavior doesn't overwhelm me. Often they come into the room and they're in trouble, and sometimes they're forced to come into our room. And so if we say to them, I can see how overwhelmed you must have been at the time. I get why you did what you did. And what that does is it changes the focus of the incident. So instead of them blaming and denying, you help them unhook from the blame, and that's where learning can really happen. And so autistic children often are in trouble, and they have troubles externalizing with their regulation. And this impacts their self-concept and their sense of their safety in the family. And so we know that social anxiety is a really big part of autism, and we need to help them to feel safe and accepted, even in the family. And so for a lot of them, they might have been in trouble so much in their life, always getting in trouble, always the naughty brother. And the therapy room might be the first time that they've experienced true acceptance. And so as a therapist, we want to say, I'm listening. I want to know what it's like for you. I get how this is a problem for you, and it's not your fault. And so in those early sessions, we really just want to build that relationship. We're not looking to teach them anything yet or tell them off. We just want to have that relationship so we can teach them later. And so you can play a lot of games during this time. Sometimes we feel obliged to do lots of teaching, but if they're not open and feeling trusting, the teaching doesn't learn. In the early stages, we can do lots of games and just talk about language around what works and what doesn't work. And so we need to reduce some of our neurotypical habits. So children know in my room that there's no obligation to use eye contact, and sitting in a traditional therapy way, talking like this is often not appropriate, which is why they can sort of sit on the floor and I use the whiteboard, or we do drawings. So we're taking off the pressure to have intense conversation. And through games, you can teach social skills implicitly. So don't think it's just wasting time playing games. There's lots of skills to be learned there. And even for a bit of chatting, I find that if I chat while I'm like shuffling my cards, then I'll get a lot more conversation than if I'm having an intense one-on-one conversation like this. And so think of what you want to achieve. Is this a teaching moment? So we constantly need to judge, are they able to learn at the moment? So an example might be, let's say you want to pack up a game at the end of a session. Rather than just expecting they should pack up the game, ask yourself, are they regulated enough to be able to do this? And choose whether or not they're ready. And we can scaffold it. So, if we think that we'd like to teach them the skill of, helping with packing up, but you can see they're quite dysregulated, you could say something like, can you just pick up those 2 pencils there and I'll do the rest? So to keep it achievable. And then we need to teach this skill to parents as well. So sometimes parents have really strict rules of what needs to go on in the house, and to teach parents that we don't always keep it strict. So, for example, if you have a rule that the child has to put their lunchbox in the sink after school, but you can see they've come home really cranky and difficult, maybe you could just say, you know what, I can see you've had a hard day today. Let me do it for you just today. And parents often worry that they're being too easy on their kids and, they need to contribute and do more. But what we actually find is if a parent can actually say, I can see you've had a hard day, I'm going to do it for you, then the child feels heard and seen, and the anxiety reduces. And over the long term, we do get more compliance at home. I'll point you, I won't do it now because we don't have a lot of time, but this is a video I've made that explains about the 2 parts of the brain, which you could show kids if you want to translate it for them. So I guess when we come to the idea around the ACT stuff, there's a big expectation that we should be happy all the time, and that we tell everyone that we're doing great. And the culture teaches us that it isn't good to have negative thoughts and feelings, and that we think there's something wrong with me if I have an unpleasant feeling. And so when we think about neurodivergent kids, autistic kids, many of them assume that unpleasant feelings are due to being autistic, and they don't realize that all humans experience difficult sensations. And so this increases their struggle with difficulty even further. So some of the common thoughts they might have is, I'm not normal, there's something wrong with me, or I'm the only one who feels like this. And we crave fitting in because our ancestors, our caveman ancestors, they needed to fit in, because if they weren't part of the tribe, then they'd be left out alone and they couldn't survive. So that's why we today have inherited this drive that we need to feel like we belong. We need to feel like we fit in. And when we don't fit in, we have very high levels of social anxiety. And so for autistic people who've often been bullied and who haven't been fitting in for much of their lives, they have very high levels of social anxiety. And so they struggle with this concept, I'm not normal. And the more we feel abnormal, the more my threat response rises. And when we feel more threatened, we become more rigid. So the idea behind ACT, of having the acceptance of struggles, is particularly important for autistic young people. But adults often tell their children that their feelings are wrong. And so we tell them they're wrong because we want to make them feel better. Like we say, that's okay, or don't cry, it'll be okay. But what you're teaching them is to not trust their own feelings. And as part of an ACT therapy, we want to get young people to notice their feelings and to recognize them and accept them. And so it's counterproductive when the adult tells them that their feelings are wrong, that they're misinterpreting them. And so these are some of the things that adults might say to children that makes them think that their feelings or their thoughts are wrong. And this, what it does is it gives the kids the message, it's wrong to feel like that. And so the reason we do it, it helps us as adults feel better. We get the kids to do what we want, but we're ignoring the young person's need and their ability to properly interpret their own signals. So a big part of our work is to work with parents and to teach them the language around acceptance of their own difficulty and acceptance of their children's difficulty.
We have actually one question and 2 comments. Would you like me to read them right now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, Jodi. I'm autistic. I'm an autistic person and work with children with neurodiversity. What to do if a mom is not ready to accept an autistic child? I realize it's a difficult process. Her son is 11 years old and she hasn't told him about autism yet.
Yeah, it's really tricky. And I think the idea is just starting off slowly and talking more about just differences. So some of the stuff I talked about at the beginning about valuing difference and without necessarily talking about the diagnosis. But the problem is that if you don't accept the diagnosis, then there are going to be mental health problems that come up. So it's going to be really important for the parent to recognize that the cost of not accepting is going to be very high.
Thank you so much. Okay, the second question. My student's mom is also very concerned about stimming, which is very intense and can be disturbing to those around him. There are even complaints at the school. How can we help without masking?
Okay, that's a tricky one. And I think that the idea is that sometimes there does need to be some masking. And I think that it's really tricky if it is going to alienate him and make the other kids not like him and cause trouble, then it might be appropriate to do some masking. But we have to recognize that if he is going to mask in the class, then that is going to be a big mental health cost. So if he decides, I'm not going to mask at school, then the parent needs to give him lots of downtime in the afternoon, no demands, no expectations. So there are some people that say just let them be and never mask, but I think the reality is if they never mask, then other problems happen. So it's about balancing it.
Thank you so much. And the last one is a good metaphor with a foreigner. It will be necessary to remember.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So I love the metaphor with the foreigner also. I use it a lot with my neurodivergent clients. And also I love the metaphor of the theater. And also right now you said about the coffee shop, somebody smells, somebody doesn't smell. Metaphors are often a very good tool, to work with. And it's a myth that autistic people do not understand metaphors. That is a myth.
True.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Jodi, for being here with us today. It was marvelous. I so much admire you. I so much admire your work. You are, you're a goddess for me of autistic and neuro divergent people. Thank you. I hope to be working with you again, and have a good day.
I'm sorry that we didn't quite get to all the resources. So, let me just share my screen again, 1 second. Because I've got some resources that people might, because we didn't get to some of the ACT stuff. So I've got a book coming out next year, which is very exciting. And there's a huge chapter on using ACT with neurodiversity. It's not out yet, but it will be out very soon, which is super exciting. Maybe, Olga, you can translate it for me. You never know.
Yeah.
And I've also got, this is a free manual that I've developed, that if anyone wants it, if you just go to my website, you can get a free copy. So it's an ACT manual for using with anxious kids, but a lot of people use it with neurodivergent young people. So yeah, feel free. Oh, and the video. So I've got, I've also created some videos that are suitable for neurodivergent young people, and they're grounded in ACT work. So we've actually had them translated to Spanish, but we haven't had them translated to Russian. If someone wants to volunteer, we can do that.
I can do it, or Nastya can do it. Actually, I wanted to ask you a question. Is it okay for me to share your presentation and to translate it into Russian? Is that okay? So everybody
I would
will
love you to do that. Thank you. That would be beautiful.
I will send it. Yes, I will send all the information back to you, and also everybody can have all the information that we did not do today. Okay.
That's great. That's wonderful.
Okay, thank you so much. In the chat, there's thank you so much. Thank you, Jodi. Thank you for sharing, and it's very interesting and helpful. Thank you so much. I love your work. I admire your work so much, and I will be happy to translate the book for you and for all the Russian ACT community. So let's keep in touch. And
thank you for inviting me, Olga. It's been lovely.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bedtime for me. Good night.
Good night.